The beloved community gets reconciliation going in a real true sense, because when we think about reconciliation, if we think about it as something that's just without justice, if we think about reconciliation as what Dr. King would call a negative peace or a false peace, where we have the existence of injustice, but we're just saying we get along or there's no tension, then that's not what the beloved community is trying to point us to or trying to push us toward. But when we think about an engine, we think about what keeps the car moving. And so the beloved community, just the notion of it, the idea that we can create a space where people are treated with dignity and respect and love and honor, that propels us forward to reconciliation. And reconciliation isn't this small thing where we say, let's just get along. Reconciliation includes repairing relationships, repairing communities. It includes justice, which Dr. King defined as love correcting everything that stands against love. But in order to even move toward reconciliation, we have to understand that we have an ultimate goal. That's why I believe the beloved community is that engine. It propels, it moves, it pushes, it gives us the energy that we need to say we have to work toward reconciliation, because if we don't reconcile, we'll never create the beloved community. And so we'll live with this aftermath of violence instead of the aftermath of nonviolence.
The King Center, founded by Coretta Scott King, is the official institution of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy, championing and developing nonviolent leaders. In 2024, we impacted over 100,000 youth, equipped 150 interns, and trained over 2,000 leaders in nonviolent strategies. Join King 100 as we build King Center 2.0, empower 500,000 youth, and train 1 million individuals on Nonviolence 365. Join the movement at thekingcenter.org. Text MLKGIVE to 44321.
Good evening. Welcome to tonight's discussion hosted by the King Center, a revolution of values confronting the triple evils of our time. We are so glad to have you here with us on tonight. And tonight is hosted by Better Together, the King Center's Interfaith Initiative and Beloved Community Talks. And we greet you in love and glad to have you here. So tonight I want to invite all of you who are watching from wherever you are in what Dr. King called the World House. I want you to go ahead and drop in the comments right now where you're watching from, so we can applaud you and love on you for you watching and joining in tonight's conversation as we dive in and we are empowered and we are enlightened and inspired by some powerful and prolific thought leaders in their spaces. And so we are glad to have you here with us on tonight. Now, again, tonight is entitled A Revolution of Values, Confronting the Triple Evils of Our Time. And so I'm looking forward to a great discussion on tonight. So I want to go ahead and bring up our moderator for the evening in the person of Dr. Rashad Ritchie, who stands as one of today's most influential voices, bridging media excellence with groundbreaking scientific research, named one of the world's foremost innovative thinkers by International Business Times. Dr. Ritchie is an Emmy-nominated national broadcaster whose show Indisputable reaches over 3 million viewers daily across all platforms. So family, I want to present to some and introduce to others Dr. Rashad Ritchie, who will be our moderator for the evening. Dr. Ritchie, so glad to have you here tonight. And you're muted, sir.
Okay, we got
All
the tech issue. Thank you so much, brother. It's been a long day. Thank you, Pastor Madison, for the gracious invite, brother. And
thank you so much.
Thankful for the opportunity to come back and enjoy the conversation. So when I moderate these, I think I get just as much, obviously, out of it as anyone else. Every time our fearless leader, Dr. King, she curates some of the most provoking thought leaders. And we don't all think alike. That's the great thing about diversity, is that love becomes the great cohesion. Welcome to another opportunity to connect with the beloved community. Welcome to Beloved Community Talk, a revolution of values confronting the triple evils of our time. The triple evil of our time. Tonight, we stand in the moral lineage of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., drawing from the urgency of his landmark message, Beyond Vietnam, a time to break silence. Dr. King spoke that message to Riverside Church. This was April 4th, 1967. And he wasn't simply talking about the war. He was talking about the consciousness of the nation. That speech represented a turning point, a courageous expansion of his moral critique. Three things in particular. Number one, a searing indictment of U.S. foreign policy. Number two, a clear link between war abroad and injustice, or some will call it war at home. Three, a call for moral responsibility rooted in truth and not popularity. He insisted, quote, a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death, end quote. Dr. King not merely trying to change policies, he was trying to change our values, our fundamental way of thinking, our priorities, our collective moral center. And tonight, we continue that work, not by quoting Dr. King, but by extending his unfinished conversation with the world. And that's where you come in. The dialogue will be organic, thoughtful, responsive, and maybe contentious. We will lean into history. We will lean into theology. We will lean into data. We will lean into lived experience. And we will do so with clarity and courage required in this moment. Joining us today, let us welcome our esteemed panel of guests, remarkable individuals. We have joining us Dr. Vanetta West. We have Dr. Jamar Tisby, Dr. Kristen Dumais, Reverend Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove. Thank everyone for being on this panel. I'm starting my first question and conversation with Dr. West from this quote: injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. My grandmother would say, if you don't say anything when they're knocking on your neighbor's door, there won't be any neighbors to say anything when they're knocking on yours. Dr. King taught the triple evils are, number one, poverty, number two, racism, and number three, militarism. And they are not isolated realities. They are interlocking systems. So tonight we begin the conversation clear-eyed. All right, Dr. West, let's talk about individual actions, okay? Rooted in, let's say, consciousness science, because consciousness science is collective, but it's individuated as well. What are some of the dynamics in the individual that contributes either to the moral clarity of a nation or the moral degradation of that nation?
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you for that question, Dr. Ritchie. Thank you so much to the King Center for having us. I believe that the individual concepts, the things we should concern ourselves with personally when it concerns these triple evils, would start with Dr. King's notion that we should be creatively maladjusted whenever I want to consider how we should approach any injustice, and then in particular these looming interconnected evils that Dr. King taught about. I think about his teaching that we have to learn to not be adjusted to injustice. And I think in a very large sense with these three evils, we've become adjusted to poverty, adjusted to racism, adjusted to militarism, so much so that it's hard for us to see when they're right in front of us. And so the first thing I would say is that I would challenge each individual to assess, have I become adjusted to the injustices and the inhumanity around us? We can't even start to work on dismantling these evils until we acknowledge them, until we recognize them. And then we can proclaim, as Dr. King said, eternal hostility. Using love. That sounds funny, right? Eternal hostility to these looming evils. But we have to be maladjusted. He said, I refuse to adjust to some things in this world. And each of us today, I believe, is challenged beyond apathy to the place that we refuse to adjust.
Doc, I appreciate that point. I want to echo that sentiment and contextualize it maybe in another framework. I think some folk would rather ignore, let me put it that way, rather than it's hard for them to see that the societal construct makes it easier for them to ignore. Can you talk to that?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the way it's set up, right? To cause us to be so inundated with these different things that we don't realize that we're in this conundrum, this place in what Dr. King called in his last book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? This world house. We've inherited this large house, this great world house in which we have to learn to live together. There are so many things to distract us intentionally that's done from this learning. And so like anything we want to learn, if we don't pay attention, we'll be perpetually distracted. And I think as a whole, particularly now with the social media set up in the way that it is, we could be so easily distracted from the real work of eradicating these evils.
Well said. I want to go to Dr. Tisby. Dr. Tisby, let's talk about the church for a minute. Dr. King always saw the church as a catalyst for transformation, not a country club to be a member of, but for change, moral clarity. And he utilized the pulpit in a very effective way to remind America and the rest of the world by proxy of the great moral courage that's required in order to do the right thing for the right reason. In your book, The Color of Compromise, you talk about the church being complicit in racism and complicit in how we fight racism. How does the church steer the conversation of moral clarity in the United States via policy, and how have they failed us?
The church is always a mixed bag because it's got people in it. But what I often say about the Black church is what I've borrowed from others who said the Black church at its best can do some really, really helpful things, especially when you're talking about being a voice of moral clarity in our society. So one of the things I always say as a historian is the Black church is the only ongoing ecclesiastical body that was set up to directly refute the lie of white supremacy and racism. And so we can learn from that. And it's so interesting that nowadays you have this debate among certain Christians and certain preachers about, well, you can't talk about politics in the pulpit, however defined. Well, Black people have always had to talk about politics in some way, shape, or form because policies affected their very outlook on life, their very ability to live. back to the days when we weren't considered full human beings, back to the days when we couldn't vote, back to the days, of course, when we could be considered property and enslaved, back to the days when we could be lynched with impunity. And so the Black church has always had to have this prophetic voice in society that went beyond the sweet by and by and thoughts of heaven, but also spoke to everyday issues, because it's not good news if it doesn't change and improve the lives of people right here and now, not just when they die.
Well said. And on that point, I'm going to jump to Dr. Dumais, because when we look at the white evangelical church, I don't know a time when the white evangelical church was non-political. The conversation of abortion is political. The conversation of taxation is political. The conversation of church versus state is political. The conversation of states' rights is political. The conversation of churches having the right to refuse to marry a particular couple, that is political. All of these have permeations of political thought. However, some of those same avenues inside of the Christian evangelical movement would say that Black churches, however, are too political when they fight against some of the social injustice. You have a book called Jesus and John Wayne: How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation. I want you to talk about your book in correlation to today's politics in America.
Oof, you're right. First of all, that I think white evangelicals often like to tell themselves that they are not at all political. But politics is part of the air that they breathe, right? And so it's invisible to many folks on the inside, but it's very visible to those on the outside. But they understand their values as purely religious Christian, right? But those values happen to align with free market capitalism, with American militarism, right? That's what it is to be a good Christian and a good patriotic American, with a particular set of conservative social values, moral values, but also, and I think this is often lost, and I think this is where, Dr. King had eyes to see generations ago, also economic values, and those are all intertwined. And so the kind of American militarism is linked with American power, is linked with a sense of who ought to be at the top of the heap, and who ought to prosper. Right. And so it's just deeply implicated. But again, inside a lot of white evangelical communities, these are not even seen as explicitly political values. It is simply the God-ordained order of the world. This is just what God has told us to do. And they understand their very particular set of political views as simply being faithful Christians.
Do you find any awakening happening in the evangelical church as it relates to some of their expressed values, and then naturally some of their expressed political values, or the individuals that they have previously supported who did not honor those stated values? Are you seeing somewhat of an awakening, or are you seeing individuals hunker down on the moment of politics and not have an awakening moment?
I would love to say that I'm seeing an awakening. I'm not. I spend a long time of looking for that awakening, and I have been looking closely. It's the hunkering down, right? It's the hunkering down, and I think we can ask why. What is it? What is it about us that makes us hold on to this view of the world in over against all of the evidence around us? There are stated values, there are stated commitments, and then there's what's unfolding right in front of us, what we ourselves are participating in, right? What is holding us back from this awakening? I think that for many white Christians, there is a sense of innocence, a kind of commitment to white innocence and white goodness, and a sense that they are on God's side. And I think there's also, it's very hard to abandon that sense of purity and innocence. So then by definition, anything that you do and any view that you hold and any politics that you support is by definition, right, that you're on God's side, God's on that side. And so anything coming against you, even honest moral critique, is very easily dismissed as that's of the enemy, right? They're not with us. They're not on God's side. And so it's really tricky to know what could crack that open, what kind of prophetic message could break that open and free people to live up to the values that they claim to hold.
Because white innocence contributes to Black guilt, or the assumption thereof. I'm going to go to Pastor Wilson Hartgrove. And before I ask this question, I'm going to provide some context. There's a program called the Democracy Resilience Program. I'm a part of that program with the Carter Center. This program was started a few years ago because American democracy was in question. And an intentional effort was created in order to simply allow for civility to exist long enough to protect democracy. This is not about policy or party, but just to protect democracy. You have organized at the grassroots level for a long time, dear brother, and you have brought together factions through public arenas for a long time. What is your belief today about the state of the average person that you will engage with in connection to these three evils?
Well, I want to say that my dear sister, who is a very good historian, is right that the institutions are not making a radical shift on these commitments that I think it's also important to say have been funded to a very large degree by vested interests in this country who are cashing in at the present moment. While this has always been framed as a kind of culture war about these so-called values that were presented to especially white Christians, the people who have been behind the messaging campaigns and the organizations that have sown this into our culture, the media networks, the nonprofit organizations that send free literature and other things to people to share this message. They've always been funded by oil money. They've always been funded by huge corporations, and they are cashing in with this big, ugly bill that passed the Congress this past summer that is the single largest transfer of wealth from poor and low-income people to the richest in this nation's history. So that is not changing. However, I do believe that people can change because I've seen it. And I do believe that people can recognize when they've been lied to, especially when they begin to feel it pressing on their own backs. And that has happened in American history, and it is happening now. The communities that are being assaulted by the masked men who were funded by the same bill that took all that money from SNAP, nutrition services, Medicaid, health insurance, tax credits and such. Those communities, I live in one that has been invaded this week, and people are recognizing that they were lied to. They told them they were going after the so-called worst of the worst, whoever that is. The boogeyman is always somebody you don't know. But when they come after the person, your kids go to school with their kids, they coach your soccer team, they work where you work, people begin to realize something is wrong. And so I dropped my kids off at school this morning, and there were people standing there with signs that said, "We are family." I said, now that's the kind of family values that's going to beat this thing right here. When people recognize that it's touching their family, that's when they begin to say, I need to reorient my own values and how I'm expressing them in public life.
Well said. I want to shift the conversation to what you just mentioned, and that's values. And we will look at values as the soil that can cultivate the transformation that we hope to see. Dr. Tisby, I'm going to say a quote and pose a question. Quote, there was a time when the church was very powerful, when it was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society. Dr. King wrote these words as both lamentation and also prophecy. It was a challenge. He wanted the faith community to be all the faith community could be, a broader society, willing to risk comfort for the sake of consciousness and provide more clarity against those triple evils that we're talking about. But I found something interesting, Doc, and it's this. When you go out to a supermarket, baseball game, people are generally okay. We talk to each other, very diverse. And I realized the value structure breakdown isn't really the people, but the leaders that lead them, especially those who exploit certain political ideology in order to maintain or obtain power. How do you see that, sir?
I absolutely agree. When I was in grad school, one of my professors says language gives the context for action. And so our words.
Say that again, Doc. Brother.
Language gives context for action. So it's never just words. The words shape our moral imagination and lead to certain actions and outcomes, some righteous, some unrighteous. And what we have now is a leader in the highest political office whose language is giving the context for inhuman, oppressive, discriminatory action. Just today, we have the president of the United States saying, hang them.
Right. Yeah.
We have the president saying to a journalist, quiet piggy. Yeah. We have the president several years ago. Isn't it interesting that right after he finished a speech on January 6th, we had an attempted insurrection. So the words give context for action. But the good news is, just like we have bad words, bad statements, dehumanizing statements, we can also have good words, righteous statements, dignifying statements. And that is the role, I would say, of every human being. But to put it in a Christian frame, this goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 to 28, when God said, let us make humankind in our image, which gives us a very baseline of dignity. This is what Dr. King and Coretta Scott King and Dr. Bernice King represent so well, as vehemently as they disagreed with the people who were violating and withholding civil and human rights. They never stooped to the level of dehumanizing their enemies. They always respected their human dignity. We need more of that discourse today, even when, because I feel the pressure online, if you, even in opposing injustice, if you don't say the most extreme thing, if you don't hit back just as hard in some senses, you'll be seen as compromising or as soft. But we're going to have to, as people of faith, as people who respect human dignity in general, not do to others what they do to us.
Dr. Reese,
yes.
If I may interject,
absolutely.
I want to help shape, because the thing that you mentioned about courtesy is in fact what Dr. King would call a negative or a false peace. Because it is possible for us to be courteous to each other, to hold the door open for each other when we go into a restaurant and grocery store, and not want justice. not want for people to have rights, the same rights. And so I think when he's talking about a revolution of values and beyond Vietnam, and then where do we go from here, chaos or community, Dr. King starts to use phrasing like, we need to shift rapidly, he said, rapidly begin to shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. Talked about how we have a scientific revolution, but we don't have a revolution of values. And so these values are very much for him about how we view each other. Do we recognize that we each should be treated with dignity? Not in just the courtesy, common courtesy, but also, should I be able to get the same interest rates you get on a loan? Should I be able to give birth and be safe? Like, we've seen 2 examples of Black women just this week who were violated in behavior from medical practitioners who were giving birth. I mean, the most sacred moment in life, and they were violated. So those values are things like that, you know, because if we're not careful, we'll be kind to each other and blow each other up at the same time.
Yeah.
Because it's possible to say, you know, I'm going to be courteous to you, but I don't care whether or not your children live. At the end of the day, if it's a choice between my children and yours, I think yours can be dehumanized and your community can be devastated.
Yeah.
You know, can I say real quickly, Dr. West?
Everybody jump in. It's a conversation.
So what Dr. West is describing is something that she knows as a nonviolence trainer. Mm-hmm. And I'll just say that, you know, as someone who was formed, you know, and racialized white in the South, I had to learn to, I had to unlearn a certain kind of civility and courtesy that I was taught in order to become someone who interrupts the violence that happens. Right?
I need you to unpack. I think I know what you mean. I think I know what you mean by that.
Whiteness,
unpack it. I need you to unpack it for us.
If you're cultured in whiteness, mm-hmm. and you see an officer of the law dragging somebody off the street and throwing them into a van, your reflex is to say, well, they must have done something wrong. I should step back and get out of the way. You got to go through some nonviolence training to realize that to be a human being, you have to intervene. You have to step in and say, wait a second, what's going on here? You can't just take somebody. You don't have a warrant for their arrest. Why do you have a mask on your face? These are not things that whiteness conditions you to do. You know, I was taught to be polite and be quiet, but good nonviolence trainer like Dr. West comes on and says, no, let's role play this a little bit. You need to step in here and learn how to get this in your body. You got to learn how to leave your civility behind so that you can actually grow into the fullness of your humanity.
Phenomenal. I want to ask a question, but let me go back to Dr. West. You brought up the women. I reported on both of those women this week. 2 women, Black women, giving birth.
Sure.
One woman had to give birth in a truck outside of the hospital. She was literally in labor. They decided she wasn't worthy of their attention any longer. She was there for about 5 hours. She gave birth minutes after being rolled outside of the hospital. It was unbelievable to watch, but it's real. And then you have another woman, Black woman, something very similar. And I had to explain to my audience that these are 2 different Black women because it happened back to back. And we had to make that distinction because it would be very difficult to believe that the same story of Black women being turned away at hospitals while in labor would be a common occurrence. Mm-hmm. But this is where the lack of humanity obviously gets you. And these are perpetrated by the same people who would proclaim that they love life, or they happen to be pro-life, or they want legislation that's pro-life, or they want to protect the unborn. So I want you to highlight why that reality is so indicative of the societal construct that we have to fight.
So the triple evils are interconnected. I want to point out, we've talked about in this conversation already, militarism with ICE, racism with these 2 women. We talked about concerning the church racism, but if you think about it, they all go together, this racism, poverty, and militarism. And what's happening in these systems is that all three of them persist wherever you see poverty of spirit, not just poverty in terms of finances. You also see racism. You also see militarism. So these women are turned away, I believe, by folks who have rested in ignorance for whatever reason. But even if you look at these situations and you say that might not be the reason why these women were treated this way, we know systemically in this nation that Black women suffer greatly in labor.
That's right.
At a significant higher rate than white women. And so we have to begin to ask, how is racism, poverty, and then how is militarism woven into that? We see that, you know, with children being separated from their families. There's a lack of regard for life that's very much undergirded by the notion that some life matters less than other life. And so that's the racism, that's the discrimination, and the militarism comes in to enforce it. I can only imagine if that woman, if these women would have said, I'm not going anywhere, I'm going to stay right here, or if they would have caused some type of scene, even though they're the ones being violated, you might have seen the police come in. And that becomes a form of militarism, because it's always easier in this nation, most often easier to believe that Black is in the wrong. It's just the conditioning of a country. Yeah. And so then, you know, you have to have military enforcement. So all of these things are working together. Those triple evils, they're so pervasive. And, you know, when you think about what Brother Jonathan said, then you have to think, what is civility? What do we do when you see a woman screaming out in labor and people tell you, be nice, you know, be unified? But we know that unity for some people means you just go along with it. But in nonviolence, in Dr. King's teachings, it means you start developing some strategy, and if needed, you practice some nonviolent civil disobedience to get to some solutions and some change in community. So hopefully, because of what tragically happened to these two women, people are paying more attention to what happens to Black women in general in healthcare.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Well said. Dr. DeMay, it's an interesting framework we're dealing with. We're dealing with poverty, racism, and militarism as triple evils. But in your world, the world that you investigate, the world of Christian evangelicals, poverty could be interpreted as, well, that person's lazy and they didn't pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Racism can be interpreted as, well, God didn't want all of us to intermingle, and they'll utilize some obscure text out of context. And then they'll talk about militarism, that God is a God of war. So in a real sense, we can both call ourselves Christian and be on two polar opposites of all three of those triple evils.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. And this is why it is so frustrating, I think, for Christians who try to enter these spaces quoting the Bible, right? Thinking this is our common ground, right? But the filters are just, you know, so different. And thinking about underlying cultural and spiritual values, I want to bring one more motif into this conversation that I think links all of these facets. And that's really where a lot of my current research is focused. And that is on the pervasiveness of variations of prosperity theology. And prosperity theology says that if you do what's right, if you are obedient, right, however they want to define that, God blesses you. Therefore, if you have wealth, if you have power, if you have success, you have that because God gave it to you. And if you don't, if you are poor, if you are disadvantaged, right, then clearly you did something wrong. And so this insidious theology, right, ends up propping up those with power, cloaking them with a fake righteousness as they oppress, which is anti-biblical, anti-Christ. And let me just add, Jonathan made a really important point up front, which is that these things did not happen organically, right? Big business paid to destroy social gospel theology over the course of the 20th century and replace it with this prosperity thinking because it served their ends.
That's right. That's right. It served them to do so. The construct is by design. And because the construct is by design, the deconstruction of the construct must be by design. And back to you, Dr. Dumais, if the construction of a thing is intentionally there,
Yes,
it will not topple over by osmosis, which means you got to have an intentional element or designed dynamic in order to deconstruct it. That's very simple to understand generally. But when it comes to structured and systemic racism, when it comes to structured gender bias, all of a sudden the folk on that side, they have a problem seeing the connection between an intentional program to deconstruct a structured thing.
right.
And I want you to talk to that reluctancy to create fairness or equity in a system when truly they can see the inequity that exists.
Oh, that's so well put. And, you know, I think of, so I'm biased, I'm a historian, but I know this is where history comes in. History is so important because it shows how we got to where we are. It shows the construction of those inequitable systems, right? So in recent years, we've heard a lot about CRT, right? CRT.
Right.
I've actually had talks canceled at Christian colleges because rumor has it I'm a CRT activist. Now, confession, I had to, when CRT first bubbled up, I had to actually Google it to figure out what exactly it was. I'm not a CRT activist. I have no training in CRT. I am just a historian. But guess what? Knowing American history, studying American history gets you to the same place, right? CRT is just a theory built on knowing that history and seeing how it has shaped our present moment, right? It is just plain history. So if you see, first of all, how it was made, how the inequity was built in the system, then you are in a place where you can start to dismantle and bring other people in. And there is a reason why this administration has targeted the teaching of American history, right? And even mentioning things like race and gender and inequality, DEI, right? Demonizing that because they know if people see, right, it will break down the system, or it could. Then we have a chance.
Very well said. I'm going to go to our brother Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove. Reverend, when we discuss the mutual connections that we all have, Dr. King put it like this: whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. I remember the Christ saying something very similar. When you did it to the least of these, you did it to me, which speaks to that mutuality, the network that we all belong to, the connection that we cannot escape nor avoid. In that context, what is the role, in your opinion, of communities, organizations, churches, maybe even businesses, who are woke enough to understand there is a problem?
Well, I appreciate the lessons from our historian friends that there was so much that went into making the world the way it is. And history can teach us about that. History also teaches us, how powerful religion has been in that, the exploitation of religion, the use of religion to build these unjust structures. But that kind of recognition of the power of religion also opens the door to looking at the other side of history, which is, where religion has contributed to the good. And I think it's also arguable from a historical perspective to say that, every step toward a more perfect union that we've seen in U.S. history has been one rooted in moral values and in communities of people who organized around those values. So you go back and you look at the abolitionists You had, William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth, all people who were deeply motivated by their faith and their religious traditions. They recruited preachers to go out and spread their message. Almost every meeting happened in some kind of church house. So religion is at the heart of these networks, of these people's lives. Same is true for the Reconstruction era after the Civil War in the South, when so many missionary agencies built schools and organizations, new churches across the South. We see it in the labor movement of the early 20th century, the way the social gospel influenced that. We certainly see it in Dr. King's leadership and that of many of his clergy colleagues in the civil rights movement. So while it's absolutely true that faith can be twisted and distorted and used as a powerful force to galvanize people to do terrible things, it's also the case that it has and can motivate people to do what's needed to come together and to build up the common good. And so those are the values that I think we have to lean into in a moment like this. And we need that kind of leadership and those kinds of institutions to build a third Reconstruction in this moment. I mean, Dr. King's great insight in his speech at the end of the Selma to Montgomery March was that as he looks back at history and says, the Southern aristocracy, the wealthy elites of the South have always tried to pit Black and white folks against each other in order to maintain power, right, so that they could control the political and the economic system. And he said that when those two groups, and I think he very much imagines other groups joining them in the Poor People's Campaign in 67 and 68, Chicano workers from the West Coast and welfare rights groups from the northern cities, when all of those people come together and are able to build a fusion coalition that taps into the moral value of a vision of a society that works for everyone, that has great power. And I have found in those kinds of movements that people's faith not only gives them a vision to do it, but keeps them going when it's hard. That's the kind of faith I want to encourage in this moment.
Reverend, I'm reminded that at one point America had a war on poverty. Yeah. At least they said they did. But in reality, it was a war on poor people. And I don't think being poor is a personal issue. I think it is a policy issue. And I'm reminded of a trip I took. Man, I was a second year law student, and I had to drive from Georgia to Alabama Friday after work to go to weekend school at Birmingham School of Law. And so between that long drive, there will be these pit stops with truckers and just some of the local folk will go to. And I saw this guy with his wife. It's a white male, had to be 75 plus. He's outside with a karaoke box singing and playing a harmonica. And I said, well, this is really interesting. And it actually sounded pretty good. So I went and talked to him and I engaged him. And after giving him a couple of dollars and understanding some of his native music, I said, tell me your story, brother. And he talked about how he was laid off. First of all, he's in his 70s, shouldn't have to work. And his disability did not take care of the bills. And he started tearing up. He started crying because he believed he was personally failing in life.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to him, brother, there's no way in the hell that you should be concerned about any of these things as much as you have paid into the system, because being poor has been weaponized as a personal failure. When the truth is, especially in the richest nation on the planet, or damn near, the truth is it's a policy failure and they only want you to blame yourself for it, because that means they don't have to fix it or pass policies that are corrective. What say you?
And you see there, you were on your way to law school, but you were preaching the gospel. That's the gospel. That's what Jesus did. Jesus went out. Jesus lived in the Roman Empire. Romans loved garum. They were exploiting the Galilee for the fish that you make garum paste out of fish. They were exploiting the people. They were exploiting the natural resources. They were taking everything they could, taxing them, all that. And people felt like it was their fault. All Jesus does is come to him and say, no, God loves you. You are somebody.
That's right.
And I'm calling you into a movement that can transform this whole world. That's the gospel as far as I'm concerned. And what we need in this moment, because you're right, so many people have been beat down and they've been lied to with a false populism that says you can blame that group, you can blame those, blame immigrants, blame black people, blame whatever. You're always going to blame somebody for your poverty. You can blame yourself, like you were saying. But what if poor people came together and said, no, we want an economy that works for everybody? That's when we have the potential to radically transform this country. That would be a democratic populism that could bring about a third reconstruction of this country. And I believe it's possible because the numbers are there. About a third of the people in this country don't participate in politics anymore. Most of them are poor. They don't participate because they don't think either side is on their side. But if those people could organize and join with other people of goodwill who want to see something that works for everybody, that would be a great majority in this country.
That's right.
There are more people who didn't vote in the 2024 election for either candidate than voted for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. I think we need to organize those people.
Good point to make. And they're ready to be activated with the right activation. We only have a few minutes. I want to go to something I call rapid fire. And as I transition, the way this works is I pose a question directly to a panelist and you provide the shortest but most accurate answer you can. We try to get as many on record as we're able. Quote, we will never be satisfied until justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream, King said. My first question, I'm going to go to Dr. West, all right? Dr. West, one word that describes the greatest moral threat facing communities today. And you've got to take a few seconds to think about that one word. That's fine, or one phrase.
Unconsciousness. I would really say unconsciousness. It leads to being complicit in these evils. It leads to apathy. Just the ability to say, I may know that's happening, but I'm not going to put any effort into working on it. I think that's why Dr. King said we need a call to conscience. Or there's a book that's a compilation of his words that calls us to consciousness. But I think we're suffering at this point from being unconscious. And he said, and he said we need to remain awake through a great revolution. So we got to wake up. I know we've allowed people to demonize the word woke, but we need it. We need to get woke and stay woke and be woke.
But it's good to be woke. Isn't that the irony of it, Dr. West? The irony is, if you ain't woke, you sleep.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
All right. Okay. Dr. Tisby, fill in the blank. Nonviolence is not passive. It is what?
Confrontational.
Come on. Confrontational. By design.
A lot of people think that nonviolence means being a doormat. Nonviolence is a strategic approach and a philosophy that actually provokes a confrontation to highlight the injustice of the oppressor and the righteousness of the oppressed, and to cause action for justice.
Well said. Well said. Dr. DeMay, do we still have you here?
Yeah.
All right. Beautiful. Okay, here's yours. What is one myth about the triple evils we must debunk immediately? One myth about those triple evils we must debunk immediately.
They're natural and inevitable.
Okay.
Right. We can do this. We can change this. It takes that consciousness. It takes confrontation, but we do have the numbers.
Well said. And so you're saying that these things are not inevitable. They're not natural. They're not just a permeation of nature. They are, in fact, designed, constructed, and exploited.
Yes.
All right. And Dear brother. All right. So we're going to go to Dr. Wilson, Reverend Wilson Hartgrove. All right. Here's yours. Where do you see the quickest opportunity to disrupt systemic racism right now?
Vote.
Voting. Man, that's good. All right. We got a few more minutes. So I'm back to Dr. West. Okay. Rapid fire. Dr. West, if Dr. King were alive today, what issue do you believe he would speak about tomorrow morning?
I believe he speak about what he called the inseparable twins of racism and economic exploitation. That's what he, the night before he was assassinated, that evening, he was talking about economics and racism. And I believe he still talk about that. And he will still be telling us we need to embrace nonviolence as a philosophy and a strategy to dismantle those inseparable twins, as he called them.
Well said. Dr. Tisby, one value we must recover to dismantle the triple evils.
Truth telling.
Truth telling. Wow.
The truth is under assault. We have a president who has an entire platform called Truth Social, which is a grand irony because there's so much there that traffics in misinformation, disinformation, and untruth. And we have a whole cadre of people who call themselves Christians just flat out breaking the 9th commandment that says do not bear false witness, and creating and participating in the myth making. And so we need to hold up the truth tellers, people like historians, people like journalists, people like public officials who are committed to the truth, no matter who it offends. We need to protect them. We need to tell the truth, and not just at the macro level, also on a personal level. We next week, y'all are going to be sitting around the table, potentially with family members who are co-signing some of the injustices that we are seeing and experiencing. Are you going to tell the truth in love then? Are you going to tell the truth at your church or your faith community? Are you going to tell the truth with your friends and your co-workers? That hits close to home because you risk rejection. But let me tell you, on the other side of that, there is a community of people who are dedicated to the truth, who you may not even know yet. And so what I can guarantee you is that as you ally yourself with the truth, you will find other truth tellers, and they will become a new community for you.
There you go. There you go. Doctor, go ahead.
Dr. Rashad, I want to say real quick, because I don't want to be remiss. I don't want people to leave this conversation thinking that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wouldn't absolutely be crying loud and sparing not about militarism in this world. So I did want to add, I believe Dr. King would be very adamant, in particular, about the United States participation in what's happening in Congo, Sudan, in Gaza, Palestine, because as he did with the war in Vietnam, he called us to account for our spending on militarism and our genocidal tendencies and our failure to address poverty while focusing on militarism.
And with that, my time is up. I am so thankful for this robust, brilliant, and engaging panel. Thank you for your continued leadership. You are transforming the world daily. What lies before us is not simply the weight of those triple evils: racism, poverty, militarism, but the extraordinary possibility of who we can become when we choose a different path. Sometimes you need to see a villain to realize you're a hero. When we see how these forces interlock, we also see how solutions can interlock as well, how justice can ripple across systems, how compassion can transform culture, and how truth can reorder the priorities of the masses. Possibilities are already emerging. Communities are organizing. Young people are demanding a world that is different. Faith leaders have started to find their prophetic voices again, and everyday people refusing to normalize the injustice and the lack of dignity that they see. The world Dr. King envisioned is not a distant dream. It is a possibility waiting on our participation. It is built decision by decision, value by value. So let us not focus on what we are up against only, but also what we are building. A society where every person is valued, a culture where injustice is not the norm, but justice is the norm, not the exception. An economy that lifts people up rather than leaving them behind. And a nation, a world that chooses peace over war, humanity over fear, and love over indifference. Anytime you take a picture when you're out and about, and there's a group photo where somebody says, well, let me see how I look in the picture. Is it a good picture? The only thing you care about is how you look in that picture, not how the person next to you looks. And if you don't look good in the picture, it's not a good picture. So you ask your friends, do you mind retaking the picture? Will you retake the photograph? Will you take 10 seconds to retake the picture so that it's a good picture for us all? That is the fundamental question. Do we have the patience? Do we have the heart to say, yes, friend, I would take a few seconds to retake the picture so that we all look good in this picture? The beloved community is not an aspiration. It is a possibility that we activate every time we lead with conscious courage and compassion. It has been my pleasure to host Beloved Community Talk. Thank you.
The King Center, founded by Coretta Scott King, is the official institution of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy, championing and developing nonviolent leaders. In 2024, we impacted over 100,000 youth, equipped 150 interns, and trained over 2,000 leaders in nonviolent strategies. Join King 100 as we build King Center 2.0, empower 500,000 youth, and train 1 million individuals on Nonviolence 365. Join the movement at thekingcenter.org. Text MLKGIVE to 44321.